Welcome to today's roundtable. We're going to have a critical situation executive roundtable, which will be hosted today by David Pultorak, who's an author and somewhat expert in this field. I believe he's had quite a few years of experience in this area. And he's going to provide us with a wonderful delivery, as well as we have an excellent executive roundtable, or a group of executives who will actually help address some of the issues, answer some of the questions that you all may have, as well as talk about some of the key points that David may call out. Before we get there, I would like to just do some general housekeeping. We are the itSMF group that represents the Chicago local interest group. We are part of the larger organization, which is the itSMF USA, which is a service management forum, which focuses on some of the core discussion points around how to manage and operate and function within this wonderful digital world and environment that we have today. What we do is we actually have, you can advance and continue on, and I'll speak to these, Dawn.
Yep.
What we do is we actually have a number of functions that we do. We are committed to, once again, engaging the community as we're doing today. We're looking at having some of the discussions that are key and integral to ensuring that we have a strong, what we would call, service management industry. But as I've said in the past, we're also looking at digital organizations and how we run. We're no longer simply IT, we are digital organizations, and we're looking at engaging and bringing together service professionals of that type. As mentioned earlier, we have a number of events, and today's event will focus on critical situation handling or critical communications around critical events and situations, which will be delivered by David Pultorak. But we do have an upcoming event, which is pretty interesting. I know that I play with this quite a bit, which is AI and GPT. And I would encourage that on July 13th that you also tune in for a delivery in this particular area, in which we'll have another discussion around the effects and impacts. I believe we did have some previous discussion on how it's used. We would love to engage and understand some of the concerns, the threats, some of the salient points that we need to discuss about this, and just come together as a community and have that discussion. Also, we have future discussions that we have. You probably have heard of Jim Dubois, who's a Fortune 500 board member. He also was a key leader at the Microsoft organization where I worked at for many years, and he will be a point of discussion in the future to talk about world lessons associated with digital and IT organizations as a whole. And then also we have David Cannon, which many of you all probably recall. He's been around in the ITIL space for many years, and he can provide us with some great information around what we do and how the industry is being shaped and where it's going forward. Moving forward, though, I think there's a point that we need to really note, that the itSMF USA organization, once again, we bring together many groups. We have groups throughout the country. So what we're looking for is to help people connect, help people grow and learn about the various concerns and issues associated with itSMF. And what we encourage is that you join one of your local leagues, for example, the itSMF Chicago organization. As you can see, we're not just going to try to sell you on the skyline, but we're also going to bring you into the fold by discussing some of the key topics and key discussion points that can impact you. Our membership today is fairly thin, but what we're looking at doing is growing. As you see, you have me as the current president, but you have our wonderful vice president who actually organized this activity from the core up. We need other members such as yourself to join and help us grow and help us develop our environment so it can flourish in the Chicago area. So moving forward, let's look at going to our discussion points, in which I'm not going to go into deep introduction of David, but I've had a lot of interesting experiences with David. David's an authority in a number of areas within the service management field. He's authored a number of courses and books and white papers, and he spoke at a number of conventions and I'd say conventions, and other gatherings. He's renowned from my perspective. I've known him since I hate to say the early 90s, Dave. Don't tell anybody how old I am. But he's a great authoritarian in a lot of areas. So I would say, welcome, David. It's your floor. I look forward to your discussion. Thanks, David. It's you.
Dave, do you want slides or do you want me to put those off now?
It looks like he's frozen.
Let me stop my video.
Or he's very happy. There you go.
You see slides again?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not sure you're hearing me. Are you able to hear me?
David,
We
we can hear you.
I'm breaking up.
Yeah.
David, we can hear you.
So let's, while you're working on bandwidth, why don't we do a roundtable for the panelists? Please, do you want me to go ahead and have them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their input into critical situation handling while you're kind of recovering your bandwidth?
Yes.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do
Yeah.
that.
Let me do this.
Okay, so one of the things that David was going to have you guys do, and we'll continue doing that right now, is for the panelists, we'd like to have you introduce yourself, where you're from, and what's your experience with critical situation executive handling is. You know, what's a lesson learned that you would share, and one of the things that you're hoping to develop, because the goal of our itSMF meetings is really bring your talent to the table and share some of the things you're trying to learn. And together we all achieve something a bit more. And because you're the first person we see, Pat, let's go ahead and start.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to figure out how to change my order in Zoom, but it doesn't seem to work. So I guess I'm stuck at the top. So I'm Pat Calhoun. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Espressive.
Can you introduce yourselves, please, sir?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. Yeah, cool. Okay. Let me start again. So I'm Pat Calhoun. I'm the CEO founder at Espressive. We're basically an AI virtual agent company. Started my career on the service desk a long time ago, admittedly, although it's interesting that here we are in 2023 and the way that I see service desks being run is really not all that much different than it was back in the early 90s, which is by essentially putting butts in seats. And, you know, what I've been focusing a lot of my journey is really on how to transform that service desk. So before this company, I used to work for ServiceNow. I used to run their products. And so I got to interact with a lot of customers that have gone through more than their fair share of critical situations. And one of the things that, you know, that dawned on me, and one of the reasons why I started this company, is when a critical situation occurs, it consumes everyone. It consumes all of the staff. And of course, it has a very big impact on a large number of people. But the reality is there's a lot of other people that actually have needs and issues and requirements during that critical incident that actually have nothing to do with the critical incident. And those people are left high and dry. And so that's one of the reasons why I really came to realize that there has to be a better way to do things. And people have to start leveraging automation a lot more so you can free people up to deal with these issues. So that that's sort of where I'm coming from. Don.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. Dr. Sreeni. Sir.
Very, very good morning. Good evening, everyone, where you're joining from. My name is Sreeni. I think, you know, as like Chris was saying, you know, been in the industry for quite some time as an architect, developer, leadership, global, you know, delivery, several of the stuff. But I think, you know, putting in the context, like, you know, I built several practices around innovation, service delivery, and service, you know, agility, right? So that's one. When I was looking some of the data, I think what Pat just mentioned regarding critical incident, which consumes all, we've been there, you know, many times, like, you know, for no reason, every employee gets pulled into it, right? So one of the things what we look at primarily to enable the large corporates or the small ones is to see how to be proactive, because if I look at the industry currently, I think over 30% is not even prepared for the next crisis, right? So this is alarmingly dangerous, and this space seems to be a $20 billion by 2028, which is kind of very impressive. So till 2-3 years back, till COVID hit us, we didn't know much. But I think once the COVID has come in, I personally ran the initiative within the organization, as well as helping the client organization whom we service with those special processes to how to become quickly agile, effective in a timely manner, to create a coherent and consistent information across in a short time. So that's our specialty. But at the same time, it's very, very important. Technology can be a double-edged sword, where it can create a lot of the spurs of issues for kind of how to contain. At the same time, if it used well proactively, we also see that it can be really to the good advantage in terms of automation. So reduce the number of, I think, seats, as Pat said rightly. It's a limited number of though years have passed, we're not kind of evolved in that. So that's an area we work. I will talk more about later on some of the interesting aspects, but right now let's go with the others. But very happy to be part of this one. At least awareness is coming, which is very, very important for me in this critical space. Yeah.
Glad you're here. How about you, Dr. Barone? 2 o'clock in the morning in Australia.
All good. And
Okay.
you already gave away my secret location. I'm currently in Melbourne, Australia. And as far as my experience with critical situations is concerned, I would never consider myself as an expert or as a person even who would love to deal with those. It's just that if I don't find those situations, they seem to find me. In the light of COVID, there have been a lot of critical situations occurring. In fact, throughout the COVID times, my area, digital transformation, had to be closely linked to the crisis handling. And I very quickly had to learn a number of lessons. First of all, start appreciating predictive analytics and predictive approaches whenever there's a critical situation to deal with. Because when I was growing up, I was told that history repeats itself. Well, I think not quite, and not always. Another expression that I learned growing up was don't trouble until trouble troubles you. And I think somebody already mentioned we need to be proactive rather than reactive. So we're living through very interesting times where critical situation handling is truly pivotal to making any project a success. And again, looking forward to listening to others and talking about it a bit more later.
So happy you're with us, Dr. Barone. And we'll finish introductions with you, Mr. Bill, and then I'm going to go back to you, David, and I'm going to let you kind of level set us on critical situation. Mr. Bill.
I appreciate it, ma'am. Bill Talbot, based out of Atlanta, actually. I'm actually one of the leaders of the Atlanta League for itSMF USA. In addition to I'm also have an additional community I'm doing because I'm also a coach for asset management, software asset management, configuration management for the IT Management Co-op. And the reason why I do stuff like this is when it comes to critical situations, if you don't know where your assets are, you don't have a business, which means you don't have a critical situation, right? No, yeah. But seriously, you have to figure out where you are and how you're looking at it. So for me, from a critical situation, and trust me, I'm a Chicago boy that got lost. Like I said, I originally started Chicago. I'm in Atlanta now, so I had to go south. There you go. But the whole idea is where are your assets, right? Because critical situations, if you don't know where your IT is at any point in time, hardware, software, even configuration management, you have a problem. Number one, right? And being able to understand how to better align that. That's what I help coach folks all the time, whether it's the practitioners, whether it's the end users, whether it's executives, and to be able to better understand, okay, how do you better align that and make that, just think about commonplace as your point. Do you want that critical situation to be there? You don't. It's all about, as we said, how you react to it. It's not, we know it's going to happen, whatever it is. It's about, do you have enough information you can actually react proactively towards it and address that situation in a calm demeanor as much as you can, right? Well, with that, I'll hand it over to you guys.
Excellent. David, over to you, sir.
Yeah, sorry, I'm on my phone now. I was trying this and I think I have a much better connection. So I'm handling my critical situation calmly, I hope.
Doing
Yeah.
awesome.
Do you need
Well
do you
said,
need
well
the
said.
slides back, sir? Do you need the
Yeah,
slides
if you want to
back?
put them up, that's fine. I'm looking for the money slide, which is what we're going to talk about in what order. So I was commenting earlier, there's certain times in our industry where we don't really, best practices kind of hold state for quite long times. We know how to run the help desk, we know what we're doing, technology hasn't changed that much. And then all of a sudden there's waves, when you think of the service desk just even 5 years ago, and now all the different chat bots and different channels and integration and the new tools, everything from, next thing to happy signals. There's just a lot of stuff out there. And there's new ways of doing things. There's new ways to get at experiences and manage them. And critical situation handling is another one of those things where it's morphed. And so the point I wanted to make is there's times where we don't, us contributing best practices, discussing best practices is almost unnecessary. We've got it going on. Things haven't changed that much. And then there's critical times, and that's now. Critical situation handling is one of those things where the pitch, the velocity of these coming at us, and I just want to make sure I define critical situations for you guys, because it's now we're in the age of the digital enterprise. So it's not just cyber attacks, data breaches, it is supply chain issues. We're a car manufacturer and we can't get windshields. We have to explain stuff to our, I have a friend who has a certain make of car and his windshield took a rock and the car had to be, it was like basically totaled because it was 3 years before he could get a windshield. So that's a critical situation. And also things that used to be considered to be handled on the business side, business PR nightmares like employees leaking information, untoward C-level behavior, those are critical situations. Critical situations really are anything that if you don't handle it correctly, you risk in the moment your stock dropping 15.
Right.
Areas, the health of partners, your
We're losing you a little bit again.
Finance and legal standing. Oh, sorry. So
There, okay,
the key thing here, yeah. So the key thing here is, I'm going to stop my video for a second. The key thing here is that we define for a digital organization, everything, the business is IT, IT is the business, we all know that. But that means that practices that used to be handled in silos, like the exec comm team, the employee comm team used to handle this employee issues and those comms, and they had their own holding statements and their own processes, and IT handles cyber attacks and data breaches. That working in silos with best practices that are within their domain doesn't work in digital organizations. Trying to coordinate across silos, and that's why we see every day in the news these examples of disjointed responses to critical situations, because there is no joint visualization into the problem. People on the IT side don't understand what the holding statement is. They're not involved in the drills and exercises that maybe the C-suite's involved in. And so there is a need for a joint understanding of the problem space, a joint response. That's why I wrote the book, this critical communications capability book, because there's a need for a shared visualization into these things, shared language, just like with other frameworks, some of which I've contributed, like IDLE and things. That stuff is necessary because, so enough on that. But the key point I want to make is we need you, everybody is needed now to contribute best practices in this space. So we put out a framework, just like there's an IDLE framework, which describes in broad strokes here's the critical situation problem space, here's the different elements of it. So we describe that, but just like ITIL and other practices, we don't describe every last best practice. We might mention something, but it needs your contributions for the community to really do well. So we'll talk about, for example, postmortems in the aftermath of an incident, but you may have something to contribute in terms of what your agenda would be. So in the chat window, I shared an article I wrote, because this is a critical thing, on the kinds of things that you can contribute. Because the problem with this problem space is people think that I can't share stuff because it's going to create an exposure for my organization. We had one speaker decline joining us because he thought, well, geez, if I talk about our best practices or lessons learned, that might create an exposure. There's plenty you can talk about without exposing your organization to a risk in terms of like meeting agendas and best practices. Like a simple example is cycles for drills and exercises that you do for critical situation handling. That's not going to create any kind of exposure for you. You just say, here's generally what our rhythms are, and here's the reporting we do, and so on and so forth. So that list is available to you, and I'd encourage you to start contributing to the community. So with that said, I think today's a good event for that. What we can do is, if we can pull up that agenda, Dawn, I think that's important. What we're looking in this roundtable is to say, hey, what's one area where you have a best practice that you can contribute, something that you've changed, something that you've done. And I'll use the example, I can start with an example saying holding statements. So when a critical situation strikes, have you crafted holding statements, meaning this is what you say. It's like you just heard on the news that you got a data breach. What do you say? Well, that should be in the can up front, tied out to your mission, vision, values, and that should be disseminated across the organization. So anybody in the organization who somebody sticks a mic into their face can say something aligned to your mission, vision, values. Customers are most important to us. So we don't know the extent of the breach. This is what we're doing to take care of it. We'll give you an update this, but nothing untoward, nothing that'll throw a monkey wrench into things that'll make the stock price drop. Things like, and this is what we're trying to avoid, the C-level exec says this, the low-level technician in IT says the exact opposite, and the market goes crazy and says, you guys don't have a handle on this. You know, you think about Target, Home Depot, some of those cyber attacks, you know what I'm talking about. So I have best practices, for example, for what should go into a holding statement. How do you disseminate that across the organization? Do people understand what that is? So that's one area. And then if I mention, so that one area you can say is what's one best practice you have. Another one is a burning issue. And I can tell you for one client I'm working with, what we're working on is really the service desk being up to speed, including the chat bots, the web properties for responding and disseminating information, not too much, not too little, the right information, the aligned information in the middle of a crisis. So one of the challenges that they've had is, you know, they'll get calls on the service desk, and the service desk personnel in the past were not even aware that there had been a data breach or whatever the situation was, and they're getting calls on their consumer line. They'll even get employees calling on the internal line, and they're not briefed. They don't know what to do, and then there's a fumble, right? So having alignment across the organizations is what we're looking for. So that's one thing, one burning issue they're working with. So if you have ideas for how to get that alignment, how to include the service desk in the aligning around CritSit handling, that's something I would love to hear about. So that's the basic thing. What we're looking for is for each person to contribute. You know, think about one best practice, something that you're doing now that worked. It could be, here we had an issue here. We realized that we need a better post-mortem, post-incident agenda, and this is what we added. or it could be around holding messages. It could be around including the right people in drills and exercises. Another example of a burning issue for one customer I have is they're having situations where they run these drills and exercises, but the exercises are overpopulated with surrogates, right? I'm not coming. So the people that are actually going to be involved aren't involved in the real crisis, aren't involved in the preparation. So that's not cool. How to address that to make sure that the right people are involved. So anyway, having said that, that's the sort of lather, rinse, repeat we want to do. Hey, do you have a best practice you can talk about? And also, is there something that you're struggling with that's not going to create a risk by mentioning it? It could be, it could be just how do I stage the war room or the situation room? We had a customer where the lighting was poor in their situation room, and they looked sinister when they were interviewed by the press, and that's shadows in their faces. So there's a lot of little things that contribute to you being successful or not in these situations, and that's an example. So I'll just turn it over to you all and say whoever wants to start, let's start working our way around, or Dawn, if you've got a better way to do it to rotate through the participants. But we're looking for a best practice and also something you could ask the group for help with.
I think that's a great way to start. And if you're shy to start talking your way in, Charles and I are also monitoring comments so that we can actually cue that if it starts to get really challenging. So yeah, I think it's a great way to start. Why don't we just open the mic basically and say, where are you from? What's the best practice that has worked for you in terms of critical situation framework? What's the burning issue that you'd like feedback or input from? Let's use the format that we've got in the, I'll keep the agenda up for a while so that it can help to guide our discussion as we begin. And then I'll take it down so we could actually interact. Sound good? All right.
That's awesome.
So where do we begin?
Well, since everyone's shy, I'll step right up. That's usually my style. So when it comes to critical situations, we've not seen anything like this the last couple of years at all, right? Yeah, just nothing. COVID, no. Especially when it comes to understanding where things reside, back to asset management. So I'll give an example of something I ran into. I was helping a client with one time, is when March 13th happened, the day I will never forget of 2020. This specific customer said, everybody go home, take your PCs, take monitors, take chairs, take them home with you. We'll worry about tracking them later. No type of situation happened whatsoever. And sure enough, they came back. It's like, we have no idea where anything is, Bill. So what we just don't, right? Now, I'm sure that's only happened to one customer, and this just had to be part of a government agency, just one customer. But my point behind that, right, is for that critical situation, they came back. It's like, okay, we honestly don't even know where to start. What I found out from that standpoint, what they working through, and it's like, okay, let's start talking through this and figure out how we can better collaborate, was they were not even paying attention to what they had in the first place. Right. So when you look at understand your portfolio, and I'm talking about hardware and software and virtual type of environments, right? And there's lots of different ways you can take that. But in this case, this was all COVID related. They say, okay, let's put a policy in place to start tracking what we have and actually measuring what that means. Because the one thing I found, the burning issue to me, even with this type of situation, asset management, yeah, okay, you say, okay, we're going to blame it on asset management. They don't know where the data is, or software asset management, we don't know where compliance is, or somewhere in between. And there's lots of different varieties we can go down there. But the burning issue I see that we still have today, it's an industry problem. It's not just this specific customer, having this customer too. But when it comes to configuration management, when it comes to data quality, we don't pay much attention to it. That happens for most environments, right? And it's not being negative. It's more about constructive. How can we better improve how we look at things? Because at the end of the day, we're being so reactive in what we're doing day to day. Back to your point, David, we're not being proactive. That's been mentioned a couple of times. Is understanding, okay, where are we at any point in time? I'm not saying don't do a DR type activity. That'll definitely help, but that's a burning issue I'm seeing from an industry perspective is how do we better manage how we're looking at our data, even operationally. I can do the entire asset lifecycle. It's great, but let's just hear operationally. It's hit a small part. I'll say small, air quotes, how we look at that to work through that. And that's not just a 30-day item, right? This is something that it's ongoing, but I see a lot of organizations struggling with that. So that's the type of activities I've run into from a critical situation. Again, I just wanted to leverage something that's been near and dear to our hearts in the last couple of years. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Bill. Good stuff.
I'm happy to go next if nobody else is going. And Mr. Bill, I have yet to meet a single customer that says I have a clean CMDB for what it's worth. So, I guess I'm going to focus a little bit more on the service desk, which is, one of the things David was talking about earlier is just the awareness in the service desk that something is actually happening. And this problem historically has been an issue where people are calling in, they have a particular problem, and just the kind of the distributed nature of the service desk where agents are interacting on a one-by-one basis, it's hard for people to really understand that there's a theme going on. And it's generally not until somebody's looking at some dashboard and sees an influx of tickets and does some form of an analysis that goes, oh, wait a minute, something's happened. And this got even worse through the pandemic and this, this hybrid workforce. Now that we're all working from home, it used to be in the past, you could probably look over and say, is anybody else seeing or hearing about something like around this particular topic?
Yeah.
But that doesn't really exist that much anymore since we're all now at home. And so it has become harder and harder to start identifying patterns that are leading to, some kind of a critical incident or major incident or what have you. And this is where, what we actually see is leveraging technology. So, David, you were talking about bots earlier. I don't particularly like the term chatbot, but we can use that here for the purposes of this conversation. We generally use virtual agents, but what a lot of these virtual agents are actually doing, in addition to trying to automate the resolution of issues, is they're actually collecting patterns. And when they start seeing that there is a pattern around tickets or not around tickets, but around topics, it starts elevating that to the service desk so that you're not waiting for somebody to be staring at a bunch of tickets and trying to do manual correlation. It's doing the correlation on the fly. And that really helps the service desk get immediate visibility into what's actually happening.
I have a question for you. I just for the group, and I actually have a question for the Michael, I guess, as well. Is it's sort of like let's snap into a critical situation. An employee has leaked very sensitive information, company secrets, intellectual property, gets out on the market. Your help desk starts getting calls on that. Your chat bot starts getting, or virtual agent starts getting inquiries on that internally from employees. What have you done? And I'm trying to, what could you have done proactively so when that moment of truth occurs, that chatbot is trained or can be trained or the service desk can get information? What drills, exercises, what proactively could have you done in the standing phase, in the preparation to be better prepared?
Well, I don't know that you can be proactive, because if the leak happened, the leak happened, right? So it's really hard to get ahead of the leak. However, one of the big problems that I see with today's tooling, whether you have a ServiceNow portal or whatever that happens to be, is it requires a team to kind of go off and build a knowledge article and then go through the whole approval process of the knowledge article while Rome is on fire. Yeah. And so there are tools out there. There are some virtual agents out there that enable you to just plug the hole, right? Say, we have this immediate issue. We're just going to give it the answer. And you can even have it proactively push a notification to employees either through Teams, Slack, SMS, whatever, right? So that people don't have to go to the portal and see this little banner at the top, because of course they're not going to go there.
Right.
But you can get a lot more proactive in pushing and communicating to employees that this is going on. And to a point where, you know, when they go into the virtual agent can just adjust its welcome message in real time and say, hey, by the way, this is a known issue, just to, you know, stop the bleeding, right?
Yeah, and to that point, that part of the proactive thing can be getting with the employee comms teams well ahead of any particular incident, saying, and having that that interface greased that says, when these things that occur, and they will occur, it's not if they're going to occur, how do we disseminate information? How do we make sure our output from employee comms, because those statements should come from employee comms, meets your input? So I know they're not going to go to the portal, but so what gets pushed out to teams? What's that holding statement? What's that? So that's the kind of thing. So just if I can just go back to Michael for a second, I'll give the example of Target. They made a bunch of bold statements like, we got this completely taken care of. There's no more malware on any of our servers. And then it was like whack-a-mole. The servers kept popping up with the malware on it, and part of it was an asset management issue. So if you're Target and you want to avoid that situation from asset management, what are some of the proactive steps you can take to identify servers, make sure you don't have the situation where you say, we got it licked. Every server that had malware on has now been inoculated, and then they keep popping up. Is there anything you can suggest there?
I think actually there are plenty of opportunities and plenty of scope to be proactive, because it is one of those known unknowns that when we're dealing with emerging technologies, it's almost certain that something is going to go wrong. We just don't know in advance what it's going to be.
Right.
And in my part of the world, the example that you came up with, David, is particularly relevant, because from the year 2023, the Australian government has been introducing new standards for data management and handling, which are compulsory for organizations to follow almost religiously. And of course, it really increases responsibility of the corporate players, as well as individual responsibility of those involved. First thing I think for an organization to prepare themselves for such situations is to understand what the risks are, and try to emphasize that no matter what the technology is, at the end of the day, it's a human who is responsible. And technologies, we can use technologies for decision support, but we really have to own our communications. We really have to own our data management practices. And delegating decision-making to decision support systems, I don't think it's a very valid approach. And it's not really what we can do. So I would definitely emphasize this point. And I think this is a way of being proactive. Something may go wrong, but we can maybe mitigate the risks at least to some extent if we're going to establish maybe the pain points, who is responsible for managing those pain points. And of course, those individuals are going to be human rather than the systems.
Yeah, and that's one point I do want to make, and thank you for that. And we'll go back to our other speaker in just a second. But when you think of a continuum, and you think of a continuum from mitigations to contingencies. So mitigations, things we do to close off. In the old school, it was like, let's make a castle, let's put a firewall around our organization. And we're going to spend most of our effort building a big, thick wall, a deep moat, put a lot of alligators in there, you know. And so more on, like, if you use the example of fire, more on fireproof materials, and so on and so forth, and less on responding to the situation. So if you think on a continuum, the needle has moved from mitigations. There's still necessary mitigations, fireproof materials, but now more fire extinguishers, more muscles, more practice, more ability to handle what's thrown at you. So the needle has moved over to that. Over the years, the importance of being able to respond, being prepared to respond, right? So because things happen that you don't expect to happen. So I just want to make that point in terms of yes to mitigations, but what I'm seeing in a lot of organizations is there's not enough emphasis on muscle memory for response. So you think about firefighters, they don't sit there and think like, gosh, the alarm bell's ringing. Should I put my boots on before my pants or my pants on before my boots? They've got that all worked out in advance and practice. And I think, and I'm curious your experience as a group. What I see in a lot of organizations, it's sort of like disaster recovery. They don't really go and drill at any kind of regular intervals. And then when something hits, it's sort of like somebody who bought Jimi Hendrix's guitar and a note-by-note transcription of his solos and expected when they step on stage, without any practice to like play Purple Haze. It's not going to happen. You actually have to practice and drill as a team, because somebody's going to shove a mic in a C-level exec's face. And maybe he wasn't there 2 months ago when you drilled, but he doesn't know the holding statements. He doesn't know the SEC rules for disclosure, what you must disclose and then just common sense things, what you don't have to disclose, right? So, and that creates an issue. So getting things into muscle memory and being ready with contingencies, things like fire extinguishers is important. So anyway, back to our speaker. I apologize. I just want to round that out.
So Dave,
Yeah.
just to interject, we had Animesh. He actually sent some really interesting statements that paralleled with what you mentioned, Pat, as well as Michael mentioned, with regards to some of the communications and how we need to do those, but to be proactive. I think we had a theme there, and preparation is what you mentioned, disaster recovery. I'm starting to hear the same theme as well. That's starting to say, disaster recovery, we need to be prepared for business continuity in the future. And then I also heard some scaling discussions with regard to, we need to think about our external customers, our end users, and our internal teams. This is now not necessarily just an IT issue. It becomes an enterprise issue that we need to also start thinking about our the whole microcosm. The question is, how do we pull this together? Because it sounds like it's from the core, it sounds like it could be a DR communication type of issue when we're doing planning and practicing. But how do we scale this for the enterprise as well as customers? Because with us now not being IT and Bill and Pat, Pat, don't get me wrong. Service desk is great, but now we're looking at how that affects our product and being able to ship. The last company I was with, we had those types of communications that we couldn't do transportation shipping. So now we need to go and communicate externally that we're not going to make our deliveries, we're not going to do this and that. How do we scale this to the point that we start talking at an enterprise level as opposed to and practicing this and getting buy-in?
Charles, thank you. Let me add a point here. I think David, if I look at your framework on 3C earlier, right, you spoke about branding and a lot of organizational, level items. It has nothing to do with IT, right? It is that the way we see it is like the governance, almost a central, unit, which is trained in communication. Just like the data governance document, you have the communication governance has to be set at the enterprise level, at the C level. Then it need to be followed up with the governance plan, which has got a RASI matrix. Who can speak what to what stakeholders?
Yeah.
Right. We need to have that ready. Then the structured templates and practice, like you exactly said, the firefighters, right? They don't think about what it is, right? You don't wait for crisis to happen, right? Crisis will happen. It's bound to happen, but you are kind of, because you are practice, you're kind of ready with that. Right. And then because, it's not one stakeholder anymore, right? You have customer, employees, owners, investors, press, you have to handle all of those. Each has got a different, kind of units who need to speak what and what can they speak safely to bring the trust back. So you don't have a stock value drop. That's the situation here. So IT is kind of, in my view, it's more of the process overlay here. Very important. Training, education, proactiveness. Then comes the tools, right? Certainly tools is important because without tools, you can't scale. That's very clear. But then people also need to know why tools, right? And what tools, right? Which is different for different industry. But I think that's a good point, yeah.
But the key there is, when you think about this, and this is to Charles' point, is it starts with understanding the full scope of stakeholders. It's not just IT, and it's great if you
Exactly.
understand the IT experience through tools like Nextlink or Happy Signals and employee experience through Qualtrics or whatever. But what about your other stakeholders? You know, you think about J&J had an 18% drop in their stock price or their sales. I'm sorry, and their sales on their baby shampoo, and because they've what happened? Well, there's some YouTube super mom who said that their baby shampoo was made with artificial coloring, and actually it's turmeric. So they didn't have that person on the radar. So so part of our stakeholders is, it's not just IT, it's not just internal employees, it's our partners, our suppliers, all the way down the chain, and our key influencers. So when you talk about tooling, there's a tool called Sprinkler. So if I send a message out, does it land? Right. So mapping stakeholders. So that's part of the reason we wrote the framework, is to understand, listen, we've got this whole constellation of stakeholders, including external influencers, shareholders, community and society at large. We need to understand them. And, you know, IT is in every product. Even if I sell monkey wrenches, I've got online videos, I've got e-commerce, all of that is part of the product. It's not just the monkey wrench itself. And so being clear on that and managing all of that is important. So anyway, I'll turn it back over to you, but I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, let me just add one point. Like, you'll see what makes the critical communication different, situation communication different from the regular one. You have communication, coherence, and consistency. That's always there, right? But the key fourth C, if you look at the framework, is the containment. It is going to happen. How prepared are you? Whether are you reactive? You're going to, you know, get lost in the whole thing, or you're
Right.
proactive. You kind of put process in place, templates in place, tools in place, and train your team with the right stakeholders. That's what makes a difference, right? Because guaranteed, you know, somebody's going to leak. You know, you're going to have a product recall. All this is going to happen.
Yeah.
That's the nature of the business, right? You know, we can't do anything on that. Yeah.
I do want to say one other thing, because it was an earlier point made by Michael around, hey, we're virtual now, so news doesn't disseminate. The biggest learning, I got to tell you, that I've had in the last 20 years in training people on things like IDLE, et cetera, is we run these webinar simulations, and people are 10 feet from each other, and it takes 2 minutes for somebody to get the information on the incident across the room. So they're physically in the same room, they're even within earshot, and still, just because the data exists, that there's an issue, that this is the right way to handle it, this is response, it doesn't mean that has disseminated through the information, to the organization. So so take that and you say you're 20 feet from each other, you're right next to each other, and you don't understand this is what the incidents are, there's currently these incidents. You take that and spread people all over the earth, and you're going to be guaranteed that unless you grease the wheels, you're not going to get everybody on the same page with regard to what to say, what not to say. Where are we with the situation? What's the next step that's going to be done? And what, you know, so those things, it's so critical. Somebody's put in the chat, you know, collaboration is key, but the preparation, the staging for collaboration is also key. And that involves the people and their training as well as tooling. How do we know? If we don't have tooling, we don't have Sprinkler, we don't know, we can't tell if our message landed. We have no way of knowing. So knowing things like, you know, if somebody says, can we tell the press that we have isolated this on all servers? Well, to the first gentleman's conversation, if we don't know where our servers are, we don't know how many servers we have, we can't say with certainty. So asset management plays in, the service desk certainly plays in the tooling there, because the ideal situation is everyone involved, all teams, legal, governance, exec comms, employee comms, the C-level, IT, everybody has the same visualization. And I'm talking about perfection, which doesn't exist, but everybody has the same visualization of the problem. Everybody understands where we are with regard to the problem. Everybody knows what to say, what not to say at any given point. And when they comes to those critical moments of truth, executes well in the moment. That requires a lot of staging for that to work. And to make sure that from tooling to people, to information flows, to dashboards, that we can see where we are, and then we can communicate, decide, and act well in these situations. So anyway, I'm sorry, I blathered on, but I'm very passionate about it.
Yeah.
Actually, Charles, I think your point is well taken. I keep going back to where you talked about the fireman example, where, you know, they've got a fire to go to and they're not thinking about, you know, oh, I need to put on my boots, this, and this. It's because they're in the business of fires and they know how to manage them. So with the muscle memory that you talk about is building an expectation. What's the worst thing can happen and how am I going to respond to it? We had some very good examples for this. One example that I saw was September 11th.
Yep.
We had an office in World Trade Center Building 2. And, you know, when you have lost an entire building and all the assets and you don't know where the people are, you don't know where anything is, and you know that everything's gone, what do you need to recover? Most people underestimate the powerful importance of the CMDB to determine what's running where and who owns it. And in the middle of the financial centers, that muscle memory is key. We saw it again in the pandemic, where we had major incidents where supply chain, you know, critical supply chains had to stay open, had to stay live. Many of these were traditional mom and pop grocery stores that got really big. How do they keep their doors open when all of a sudden they've got COVID and they have to go to the office or to the store every day? Their business was structured that way. How do they do business differently to stagger their crews and have some of them work from home when they've never, ever done so? Had to stand up support processes like this, communication processes like this. This is what every business needs to be thinking of. Firemen, yes, we expect that they need to fight fires. We have fires in our daily business. What's the worst thing that could happen? And how are we going to communicate through it?
Well,
Yeah.
and include it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think just one point I want to still, impress. I think, David, again, going back to the old statement, right? The siloed, right, between the IT and the business, it still exists. That is something need to be really bridged, because see, tools are plenty, and we've really grown on the tools front with the AI, ChatGPT, a lot of bells and whistles are there, but it's only good enough based on the tone from the top and integrating the divisions, right? With the common visualization, what you said, that's critical. I think that's something which is still, there's a gap.
Well, there's silos also between legal and governance and compliance, between exec comms and employee comms, between the C-level. So that's why we wrote the framework. We were trying, there was no single framework until we wrote it that tied together and said, this is a common to everybody. We need one visualization, one set of tools, one set of language to talk about this, because otherwise it's disjointed. So anyway, I think we should move on to some other speakers, but I really appreciate the conversation.
So what are others' thoughts or experiences with critical situations?
Yes, we're looking for some best practices and maybe an area that you need to handle. I do want to say one thing, and when we train on ITIL and things, we talk about, here's a regular old everyday incident, I dropped my laptop, whatever, and then there's a total disaster like 9/11. Well, a major incident in IT speak is something that lies between the two, right? A regular old incident and a total disaster, where you're still in business, but if left unattended, could become a total disaster. So a lot of these critical issues, that's the main issue, is if you don't handle them properly, it becomes a total disaster. You just had a small supply chain issue, but this executive said this other executive said that, boom, your stock price drops 15%. That's not cool. That's what we're trying to avoid. Yeah.
So another example, we brought up 9/11, right? So yeah, 9/11 definitely happened. Trust me, I was in Minneapolis the entire week. I wasn't, for all sorts of reasons, right? One of the first flights going back in the air. So you want to talk about creepy? You do it with only 12 people on the plane going back with empty flights. But my point is, there's also another one that everyone resonates with here in the US, probably more international, but that's Equifax. Think about the Equifax breach, certificates going bad. Sad part was they were one of my customers. And for asset management, I put the report actually, link to it here in the chat. You can look through it yourself. I do recommend going through it. It's very boring type of document, but it's very informational if you look at it. So what the interesting part about it, and going back to asset management, is they actually did not know where all their assets were. That was the big problem, let alone the certificates on them, right? And if you look at that report, that was actually done in the US Congress. As far as that report, that's the testimony from that. You look at how many times asset management, just look at IT asset management and see how many times it's reported, listed in that document, 90 plus times. And the reason why is because the executives chose to ignore the risk. But back to your point, it's a critical situation, but sometimes the executives choose to put a blind eye towards it, right? And you want to see repercussions? Okay, everyone talks about the Equifax. We started here. Everyone knows the situation. You want to be a public entity? That's one way to do it, right? But what they did is okay, let's pounce on, make that happen. But at the end of the day, Equifax has some additional pieces. They put some policies in place, a significant amount, especially with the exposure we had on several fronts. But at the end of the day, they're still struggling. I'm not saying they're struggling to know their assets. I'll let someone else make that qualification and that decision. But it's more about, okay, it's kind of like slapstick comedy, right? Who's gonna catch the ball? It's a hot potato. Even the guy that was scapegoat on that Equifax, he didn't do it. He did all he could. He could not get management support to do it, even though he was called out in scapegoat. That's why you later heard the entire executive team was cleaned out, because they actually made the decision. So back to my point, as much as you try to do, realize sometimes you can only do so much, right? And that's the other thing we have to come back with.
Well, yeah, and I want to make a point on that, is because it's very similar to disaster recovery. And one key thing that needs to be done is to make this stuff, people don't want to think about it because it's not business as usual. The truth of the matter is now, it used to be we had business as usual, and then we had adjusting and reacting to the unforeseen or the plan, what could be construed as conceivable, but it happens so infrequently. Things like the Tylenol poisonings with J&J, that's going to happen to somebody else every 20 years. No, it happens to you and everybody else every 20 minutes. You know, the things that get reported in the news are just the tip of the iceberg. You don't hear about the ransomwares that were paid off by the hospital, you know, and so on and so forth. So it's just the tip of the iceberg. So those response capabilities have to be worked on, and that's it's not business as usual. So one of the best practices is, or the needs for best practices, how do I get executives and people that matter, and that's everybody, to think in terms of, hey, business as usual includes responding to these incidents, and same with disaster. It's not, and this is one posture I see in a lot of organizations. This is morbid. If we have a disaster, we all react, and there's a high level of alertness until it goes away, and then we're all thinking we're going to get ready for the next one. And then once it's out of sight, it's out of mind. We're back to business as usual, which doesn't include drills and exercises, which doesn't include. It's not considered business as usual. We can park that. We're not going to go after asset management because that's boring, and I'm off to innovating and running the business and blah, blah. Well, this is part of running the business. And so part of the thing I've found to be effective as best practice is you've got to make the drills and exercises short and appear to be very cogent, to be very right in your face, like this is real. This is, so for example, when you run tabletop drills, you mentioned you build them around the 3 or 5 most conceivable scenarios, including ones, you're in the banking industry, this just happened to your competitor over here, it can happen to us. So that makes it real and present danger. So you have to bring it forward. And then instead of thinking of a whole day or a whole week or one of these elongated period, having these 2 or 4 hour sessions where all the actors can get together, even 1 hour sessions, and doing these tabletop drills where you put a realistic scenario out. How are we going to react? Where are our holes? Break huddle, get into an agile sprint for improvements based on what we saw, and move on to the next one. So moving in more of an agile way in terms of preparedness and for drills and exercises is one way to break that, and it breaks the morbidity cycle where I don't want to think about it because it's so morbid to think about it that it could happen. Well, if you think that way, you're going to get hammered, and then that's what I say. So just one idea for making things a little more real and present and getting acted on.
But I think one of the challenges, David, is it's hard to know what to prepare for. And so I was working with a small regional bank. They didn't even have an online presence, and COVID happened. People couldn't even get their money out of the bank.
Wow. And
so the IT leader rallied the troops, and in what probably would have taken 9 to 12 months, they actually got an online presence in less than 3 weeks.
Yeah.
This is one of those things that nobody could have even imagined a world where we all shut down and we can no longer go to the office or go to the bank. And so I appreciate all the comments around, sometimes there's a need to have firefighters, and if you have a company that's big enough, you can actually have people, that's their job, is to basically deal with that. Smaller organizations, a little bit harder, but it's also hard to know what to prepare for.
I agree. There's going to be, and you can look at the situations, you can look at things and maybe divide them into two groups. I think in terms of expected, right, and emergent situations. So expected situations are like, this is happening this year to other banks, so it's likely that it could happen to us, right? So let's scenario around that and prepare what do we need to do to avoid what happened to this bank. So that's something you can prepare for. And then there's emergent situations like we have in Philadelphia. I'm in Philadelphia now. They had this I-95 is shut down, the major thoroughfare, because a truck went under it and exploded or whatever. They didn't think about that. And so you've got to figure stuff out. But you can have generic muscles for figuring stuff out. I hate to use a sports analogy, but if your star player goes down, you got to have a backup. You got to have some other thing thought through, even at a high level, to handle the totally unexpected, right? How are they going to reroute traffic? So I get what you're saying, but I think what I want to avoid, help my customers avoid, is the unconsidered consequences. It's like, oh, gee, I kept writing checks in my checkbook, even though I didn't have any cash in the thing. And I thought, if I just keep writing checks, I can just, no, if you keep writing checks, you have to have cash in there to pay. That's an unconsidered consequence. So you want to make sure that there's due consideration. Say, what is the consequence? What are the likely scenarios? What's the minimum I can do to prepare for them? I can't do everything, but at least we could do this, right? And one other piece I want to say, this is all in motion. The set of stakeholders, the constellation of stakeholders we have is constantly changing. The influencers out there, you could have a new executive come in. So you did a drill last month, but now you have a different person involved, and they're not briefed on the holding statements. So everything's in motion. So it's absolutely essential to have an agile improvement motion with this, because there's no way with traditional long-term, the old school, disaster recovery kind of planning thing, it just does not work. You cannot do it. You have to be able to look at the dike, see where your fingers should go, and then stick your fingers in them, and then see where the new holes are. And that's what a cycle, a virtuous cycle of agile improvement will, looking and seeing, and then breaking huddle, doing some improvement, will get you, because it's a moving target. It's a moving target.
One of the things I've delighted in seeing where technology is helping to improve the lay of the land is that of predictive intelligence, where you can actually see and detect trends based on how they're being reported. You can actually see the relationship between those trends to where a single user mundane issue actually becomes something way different when looking at the AI or predictive intelligence, you could see greater impacts than you would have seen if you just looked at the single issue.
Yes, let's get on to some of our other speakers. I'm sure they have a lot of good things to say.
Other speakers?
Yeah, go ahead, Sri.
Yeah, I think,
Sure.
If I circle back again, it again becomes overall, it is the awareness, assessment, action, agile, because it's a different beast, and then continuous audit. What I think, because it's the problem doesn't go away once, we need to keep repeating this. Essentially, the entire organization becomes top down, some kind of mentality of see it, say it, save it kind of thing, right? That's the only way to kind of, because crisis is almost like it's a formula car race where you don't have a chance to stop in the pit shop to change a tire. You need to change the tire on the move, right? It's almost like that. So it makes it even more interesting and challenging. But I think with the structured approach of the governance team, the racing matrix, and who can communicate what, and the templates and all those stuff, certainly it's something which we can do along with the technology like Don mentioned, right? So if you look at AI, anomaly detection, heat maps, all the stuff we can put in place. To a certain extent, you can find the pattern recognition, which will probably get you 60, 70, 80% right. The rest 20% is going to happen anyway, which obviously has to be done with the human intervention, right? But it's for me, it's more again the awareness, which is less, in the critical situation communication. Because when I look at the data point, it's more than 30%. Of the companies have no plan in place, which is very dangerous, right? That's where the opportunity and give some kind of the solutions from our side can happen. And I think David, we can certainly contribute certain best practices which we are using to kind of reinforce your visualization framework and toward the 3 C's what you put to the.
Well, to your point, it's also being able to humanize, I'll use that word, the analytics received from the technology. That's typically the hardest part. How does it relate to me? How does it relate to our scenario? I also see that being the case. So being able to be flexible so you can be adaptable, right? So at any point in time, and realize that still may not be the solution, but you're just going to do your best effort and for everyone to be on the same page, because we are human. Oh, I know I'm saying something we've never thought of before, but the point is we forget about the human element. And yeah, I'm focused on IT, but honestly, I think, like I put in there, IT asset management isn't about technology. It is about technology as we're looking at it, but it's about working with others. It's collaboration, stakeholder management. How do we collaborate with others? And there's multiple facets that we tend to forget. Just put IT back in the corner, right? And it's like, okay, with that, for me, one time I was a CMDB owner for a financial company. It's like, okay, they go talk to stakeholders. So I did something. They wanted to CMDB on 3 months, and a long story, much beyond what I want to talk about right now on that. But anyways, when I was finished, like 18 months later, getting something online, I had a stakeholder update with 70 different stakeholders with that. And I only had 5,000 servers. But I also had 5 different CIOs I had to report to. But my point is, we knew how to collaborate. We knew how to take the data in, knew how to consume it. And even the problem management guy, when it's all said and done, he goes, you realize how much time this is going to save me? That's the whole idea. And even for what we're talking about right now, whether it's DR or otherwise in the critical situations, how do we react, right? Okay, 9/11 happened. COVID happened. What's the next one, right? The bridge collapses. Okay, there's a data center under it. Let's go to that scenario. We can go with what ifs all day long, right? But it's being able to say, okay, it's okay. We'll work through it and let's leverage what we have and we'll learn. We have to be continual learners is kind of my point, right?
That's true.
My turn, I guess. So I totally agree with Bill highlighting the importance of collaboration. And just one point to add to it, working as a team and the discussing things together to realize that every crisis is an opportunity. And also every crisis, every critical situation that we're facing in our organization, well, there's a good chance that our competitors, that others within the industry are in the same boat. They're also facing some challenges. So it's a chance for us to get ahead. And of course, the regulated environments, the regulated industries, and this is, I think, what technology does to many of the industries. It deregulates these industries very violently. Yes, we're maybe running higher risks, but again, it's a chance to make things better, because if particular systems, if particular applications are starting to fail, it's a reminder for us to maybe review our infrastructure at large and start building greater resilience. So trying to put a positive angle to everything is very important, particularly with large organizations where people sometimes, well, they feel like it concerns them as well, but they think more about their own little individual goals and issues rather than organizational goals, and making them feel like they're part of it. They're part of this crisis management. I think it empowers them and encourages their participation greatly.
Just one comment on that. One best practice for post-mortem review of critical situations that supports what you're saying is to, when we cover, yes, we're going to cover what did we, when we responded, what needs improvement, right? Could be people, processes, technology, information, but also what did we do well that we can build on? So a positive spin on that. And then, there's a larger issue of culture, making sure that the postmortem is about learning, fixing, communicating, doing better next time in a similar situation, and not just apportioning blame, or not at all apportioning blame. So making sure it's a blameless there, but that adding to the agenda item, what do we do well that we could that we can build on? I found that to be very helpful in moving towards a more positive. Hey, this is a problem, but it's also an opportunity.
Yeah, I think, David, let me add one point here. I think this, what you said, is very, very important. The end goal of the critical situation communication, right? If you own the responsibility with the accurate information, disseminated back, right, and being transparent, you will gain the trust back. The end of the exercise, you need to get, how do we get the trust before the turbulence? How was the trust? After the turbulence, do we have the same trust? If we can, do some kind of benchmarking, I think we should be okay there.
Yes, but on to that point, and it's a well-established thing in IT around, you can actually, by the way you handle an incident, actually improve trust, even though it seems counterintuitive. So it's the same thing here. Right? J&J with the poisonings. I was with J&J when that was my first job. It was a couple months in, and they were poisoning people. So they got on top of neck bands. They changed the whole industry, with neck bands, safety seals. Their response increased trust, and it could have very easily fumbled and gone in the opposite. And there was a textbook response now that's quoted all over the place. It's a little bit old in the tooth, but long in the tooth, but it's still, you have an opportunity to spin, go to the positive, build on what's working, not just fix what's broken, and to increase trust, not just restore it.
Yeah, the recent case is the Southwest. It has gained back control. Full flights are back again. After the large debacle in the Christmas time last, right? So very, very recent case how they handled it, which is also again, much more recent, example, right? So yes, I agree. We can turn it into a positive spin and increase the trust. Good point. Good point.
Do we want to do a process check, Dawn, where we're at timing wise and what speakers haven't spoken?
Well, for our panel, we actually have had very balanced participation, and I thank you guys for that. I would like to do a check. It's 12:19 now. I'd like to check and see if there's any comments or questions from our ITSF, our members, and see if anybody has questions. So if you do, let's go ahead and speak in. Yeah, you're not so shy. Dr. Hamilton, I'm going to call on you since I see your J&J. You're right.
You want to call on me For
Yes,
what?
I am.
Oh, no.
I'll pick on you, Dr. Brandon.
Okay. Well, Charles kind of needled me earlier to get me to talk a bit about leadership styles. But let me twist on that a bit. I was the ground station project manager for launching rockets for the Department of Defense and the Space Shuttle program. And one can imagine we were in critical situations all of the time. I was also one of the lead scientists at the nuclear power plant down in San Clemente, California, near San Diego, and guided the station engineers to bring in the power plant critical. So let me go over to that second one. In the nuclear power situation, I read a lot of incident reports, but because of my top secret security clearance, I was able to get a hold of a lot of incident reports. And I used those incident reports to put together a risk matrix, a risk assessment matrix. So I put a weighted system together because, and similar to that and the aerospace situation, things happen really quickly. And you have to have something in your back pocket that can help you make some very fast decisions and feel comfortable about those decisions. The other thing I would like to mention on leadership styles, I have a PhD in management, so a lot of my discussions will be with that frame. But you're probably aware of the Delphi method of decision making, where what you do is you get all of your VPs to go away separately and take a slice at analyzing the problem without talking to one another. And then you bring them back and you try to get them now to share what they learned, and you look at some of the similarities. So it gives you a quick read on things. But back to what Charles Levy, who actually I'm one of his doctorate advisors for his PhD studies. So we talk a lot about a number of things. But one of the things that I think he's getting at is when you see yourself as a leader in these situations, you have to be agile about your style. So some people are more directive, some people are nurturers, some people are interpreters, some people are very caring managers that want to be empathetic. And I have realized, like, you could take a simple decision like where should we put the coffee maker on the floor? Well, everybody feels a certain relationship to that problem. And so you might come up with a decision 4 or 5 hours later because everybody's going to chime in on whatever. And then you have this huge decision about whether or not we should open up an office in Boston to support what we're doing here in LA. And they'll come up with a decision pretty quickly because it's like they don't really own the solution. They don't really feel connected to it. So those empathetic lenses in a critical situation are pretty tough. They're pretty tough. There's no simple answer. You just have to do the best you can to come up with a team developed solution and then pull the trigger. Just pull the trigger. Just do it. Come back later and analyze what you could have done better. My doctorate, one of the components of my doctorate are how decision making changes as you come from a small business to an international, transnational, multinational organization. And you're playing off when you go into those global environments, you're playing off about local responsiveness and keeping the cost of business low. And those are conflicting goals. It's not easy. Some of you have also been in conversations where you're playing off efficiency and effectiveness. They're competing goals. So how does one juggle those balls? Not easy, not easy. So that's my quick response to your nudging there. Thank you so much for that.
I'm happy to hear your nudge. That was good stuff. What about others? Anyone else have some input that you'd like to share?
Someone.
Well, it goes back to communication, right? So, and I think, Dr. Brandon, I think you made a great point. A lot of folks within IT, we think about our own box, right? And everything in our own world. But I have to say, I had a friend of mine years ago. He says, if I was to start all over, and he and I were like 3 or 4 companies together, and I have HP in my background, Peregrine guy, all that stuff. And he said, if I was to start all over again, I'd go into psychology. I always thought it was a really weird thing to say until about 10 years ago. And all of a sudden I go, I get it. Because until you can relate from the human aspect and you relate to that person, irrelevant where they're rational, irrational, but you kind of understand how to work with them, you're never going to make inroads. And that's the one thing I personally strive, even with all the community members I have and followers on LinkedIn, stuff like that. Because I have a following from India, Europe, as well as here in the US on my own, is how can you make yourself relatable? Because that's the only way they're going to listen, to be able to make that relatable on that side. And that's a different part. It kind of goes a little bit skewed from really where our topic is, but the critical situation, back to your human element perspective, if you're not able to make yourself relatable, you're not going to be relatable. I'm just going to be vulnerable. It took me 20 years to figure that out, but there you go, right?
Well, that's like in responses, one of the key best practices, and it takes some work to get there, but is to not come back with a corporate response, a very corporate speak thing that sounds plastic, that sounds arm's length. You want a real human response, and it's if you want your if you want to stay on message. So you want your, for example, your CXO, when they're with an unfriendly press interview, one-on-one press interview, they must have front and center of mind the key talking points, what to say, what not to say, what's on message, how it ties back to our mission, what we're doing, and how it ties back to our mission value. That's got to be front and center of their mind. But they can't have a plastic, knee-jerk, practiced response. They have to be able to bridge to points. They have to come across as human. And as I said, we ran into an issue where there's so many simple things you can do to be relatable, to come back to leadership. You can have the greatest leadership style in the world, but if the lighting in your situation room where you're being interviewed makes you look sinister because it shadows across your face, that's just, so there's a lot of elements, a lot of moving parts. Doesn't mean it's not tractable, but you need to pay attention to all those, because if you have you may have the greatest leadership for a day-to-day running of the business, but when a mic shoved in the one C-levels person's face, they don't know what to say. They fumble, they say the wrong things, they get off message, they go counter message, which is even worse. You got an issue. So making sure that there's practice there, that you have the right executives, that they have the right training. You've got a new executive. Do they know what the holding statements are? Do they know how to tie back? Do they know how to bridge to their points? I hear what you're saying, but what I think your readers really want to know, or your listeners really want to know, is that sort of stuff. That's all critical. It's funny, the guy that my co-author on the critical communication book, he worked on political campaigns. He worked for Microsoft. He stood up a lot of their critical situation response stuff. But prior to that, he worked on the monkey business scandal. He was a young person here. He's got a presidential candidate, and he's on a boat with a woman that's not his wife, and it's called the monkey business. If you think about a not easy to handle situation, that's one of them, especially when you're early 20s and your first sort of PR assignment. So there's a lot of aspects to cover, and it does come back to leadership. There was points made earlier, like we just chose to ignore that. So what they pay attention to, how people carry themselves, and that goes all the way down. When we talk leadership, I think it's followership too. It's everybody. It's everybody in the organization, the level of alignment, the level of professionalism, because it's only as strong as the weakest link in terms of your critical situation response.
I think in your example, though, hopefully an organization has actually put somebody through media training. They may not know what the corporate answer is because the building is still on fire, But if you know how to handle the media, you know how to handle the media. So you should never have somebody who just joined a month ago who hasn't gone through media training with a microphone in their.
Well, I
Otherwise,
can tell you, that's not been my experience. I'm thinking of one young CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company who's young and he's innovative, blah 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 blah. But in terms of, and they had his incident, and he was saying things off message. He didn't understand he over disclosed because he didn't understand what the SEC rules were. It's like, you know, and then you've got the hard work of walking things back, the rework, and sometimes that's insurmountable. So you're right, except I see it all the time, and that's why I get into that community. You've got things change all the time. Got a new CEO. Let's get him in. Let's get him in the system so that, because we know it's coming, we want to be ready.
Yeah. I guess some people cannot be media trained.
You know, sometimes it's the wrong person, and then that's the key. Who should be talking to the press, who's not? Because there's people that are very good at the day-to-day running down and in of the business, and they aren't necessarily the same people who are good at the up and out communication. There's analytical thinkers down and in. Right? How do I understand a frog? I dissect it. That's how. And there's synthetic thinkers, up and out, connectors. And it's a different thinking style. And some people have both of it, enough of a balance, but some just don't. And so thinking in terms of context and how's my impact of my message going to land? What's the context of this communication? It's the container for the communication. It shapes, just like a glass shapes water, what you're saying, as does relationships. So it's interesting. I think we're running out of time, but I think, you know, on that thing with relationships, what my experience is that's key. You know, so understanding all your stakeholders and have a good enough relationship with them, because if you have an otherwise perfect message, it's perfectly crafted, the clouds part, it comes down, and here it is, the perfect message. It's not going to land with somebody who you have a crappy or non-existent. You don't even know who they are, so you don't have a relationship with them. It's not going to land, or it has much less chance of landing. The opposite is you put out a half-baked message that's not really that great, but if you have trust, if you have a relationship, it can land because you've got some grace there. So making sure that things aren't sterile, that things are human, to someone's earlier point, and paying attention to those relational elements is absolutely critical. You've got somebody with the wrong leadership style, somebody who doesn't relate well, you're going to have problems communicating that end up being affecting your major results areas.
So Dave, quick question for you. Based on what I've heard, some of the comments, should most of these communications just go out of a central office, like a chief communication officer or something role like that? Because otherwise, you know, that's the person who's shaping it. And I believe those communications probably need to come up through them.
Yeah, and in a larger organization, I'm sorry. In a large organization, there's individuals and groups that are responsible for different types of stakeholder groups, like employee comms, exec comms, regulatory affairs, legal, etc. So each of them owns it. What's important is that there's a unity, there's an alignment in the messaging, even if it's tailored for their specific audiences. But there's an alignment to mission, vision, values, alignment in the messaging and the response, so that so it's not literally disjointed. So over pivoting on let's have a central comms thing will result in the negative consequence of some low level, and I just saw it in one of my customers, low level tech in the middle of being troubleshooting said something. I don't even want to reveal what it was, but it totally contramanded what the sanitized, aligned, central, ordained. So that causes issues. So you need to disseminate these messages down to anybody who's going to be involved, so they're aligned enough. Yeah.
I think, Charles, to your question, from our framework, what I see is there are three types of communication, right? One is the strategic, communication for the organization. Second one is tactical. Third one is the emergency.
Yep.
These three are kind of, comes from different constituents, who's kind of handling that. And there is an ownership for that who can put the templates, what is approved, right? That's the only thing to communicate. Who's communicating is again on the stakeholder. But I think we need to classify this, and there are different constituents of the organization who handles this, right? That's the way we kind of position it, because I don't think it's one size fits all. These are different.
And from what I'm hearing there, then Sri, if I can call you that, we're not looking at that as functional per se, based on functional verticals. We're looking at that as something that would be based on it being strategic, emergency, and tactical, right? Versus on what I just heard.
Right. Emergency, strategic, and tactical, right? But I think it kind of it won't hurt on a large organization to roll this into a, let's say, SPF, some kind of communications at the the central level, so that all the assets are kind of stored in one place of the message templates, right? So that the single story forms. Otherwise, story will, it's a Chinese whisper, right? If you just leave it on the open, soon the story will be different, right? That's my view.
Yep.
Right? Yep. And more importantly, sorry, to add to that point, it has to be clear in the templates who can communicate what without second thoughts, just like the firefighters wearing the dress, right? Because they should be trained to give the authority. That's what will make the difference.
Yes. And to whom? Yeah.
So Dave, going back to that, because Sri had a great point, Dr. Hamilton had one. How does this now scale to a smaller organization? I kind of got, you were about to talk about that. Is that, how does it scale? Because now you've gone from huge organization, we mentioned strategic, tactical, and then emergency. How does that scale to a smaller organization instead of just this huge global enterprise?
The concerns, it's a good question. The concerns are the same, and you can't do everything, right? It's very similar to you guys are in service management space, where small organization still has to manage change, has to manage incidents. It may not have all the resources available, but it has to do what it can. It has to be smart about it, what tools to use, what processes to use, etc. So it's the same thing. It starts with, and that's why we wrote the framework. It starts with a understanding the problem space. What are the important things to manage? And then some smart investment in saying, where are our big holes? Part of the framework we wrote, we have over 250 indicators of what is our capability here that go into different resources areas, how capable we are process-wise, people-wise, data-wise, technology-wise. So just getting that question and then saying, what can we do? Because we all know this. If we're in a small organization, we still have to be in line with whatever the governance and compliance regulations are. We have to have good legal standing. We're not exempt from that. We just have less resources to do it. So it has to be part of someone's job, even if it's combined roles. Whereas in a large organization, there would be a whole department. It may just be an individual. Sometimes even if in a large organization, there may be multiple departments, it's just one individual for multiple, but it still has to be tended to. It's just like, the early conversation, you can't just say, well, we're smaller, so we don't need asset management. Yeah, you still need asset management, but it can be a lighter touch for a smaller organization, but you can't just say, we're so small, we don't have to worry about critical situation handling and preparedness. You can't do everything. What can you do? And it starts with, what's the problem space, and then what roles need to be accomplished, and then combining them into smaller sets.
Yeah. So this is Jignesh. Can I have some comment?
Yeah.
So thank you all for the great discussion. I really appreciate, and this is quite interesting. However, I have some comments and questions. So I did my ITL and IT service management 10 years ago, 2010. And then, based on all the good learnings that I have been certified with that one, I always use my technical and leadership skills to drive efficiencies in IT service support and service delivery. So but those are the organizations where things are very structured, right? So where you plan to put all the processes, communications, and everything. Now the things have been like a lot of unstructured, right? I mean, the things are changing. People are, using ChatGPT, using some of those things. So my question is, how are we up to date in terms of relating the ITSM best practices with newer things that is happening with the AI and machine learning and everything?
I don't know if there's anybody else in the group. I think what I've found through change, the best way to handle it is to say, what are the outcomes we're shooting for? See, what I've found, when you look at ITIL v3 to 4, and really what's changed is there's some evergreen outcomes, but how you get there, what's involved, who's involved, what works, changes, because it's like we've moved from, with the move to the cloud and mobile, it's like moving from you still need to do maintenance on machines and monitor things, but it's like moving from the practice that you did before for a physical machine isn't exactly analogous to what you might do with something in the cloud. So that the outcomes are still there, the things that you want to control, the things that you want to keep in a desired state, but how you get there changes. By focusing on, as things change, by focusing on those outcomes and then saying, now, what is the new practice that will get me there? That's the way that I help my customers transition, because those evergreen outcomes, you may be using virtual agents to handle certain portion of the service desk nowadays, but the outcome's still the same. You want to have a good experience. And in fact, with new tools, you have new opportunities to have an even better grasp of what the experience is and manage it better. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. David, if I may add one point to that. Sorry, Pat, you're saying something?
I'll
Yeah. So the one other thing what we need to be mindful, right? The more technology is more opportunity, but at the same time, it also got the more security and exposure holes.
Yeah.
So one other thing what we do is we kind of update the organizational policies very strongly, and then continuous training to the teams so that they are aware of, yeah, you're okay to use that, but then, stay within the limits, right? That's number one. Number two, that's not enough. It also, we need to put a cop car, empty one on the highway to make sure the speed limit is checked, right? So both has to be done together in tandem, right? So it's not about limiting technology. It's a question of, use it more wisely to the advantage is what we really look at, right? Sorry, Pat, I think.
No worries. Well, I can't answer the question of what itSMF is doing around new technology like AI, chatbots, and GPT. But what I can talk about is some of the impact that GPT has actually had on the industry. And I think it was back in April, Samsung had 2 incidents, I guess we can call them, where engineers actually submitted stuff to GPT, not really understanding that GPT leverages all of the content coming into it as part of its training corpus. And one of them was source code. So highly sensitive source code was provided by an engineer who said to GPT, please help me find a bug. And now the source code is now in the public domain. Somebody else uploaded a call transcript of a pretty sensitive call and asked GPT to summarize the call. And sure enough, the information in that call can one day find itself in the answer to perhaps one of their competitors who's asking a question in this space. And so the problem here is that GPT is certainly very helpful and certainly has impressed a lot of people, but it presents a lot of threats and challenges that, a lot of people simply don't understand. So what we're seeing in our world is organizations are basically shutting down access to GPT directly and providing access to GPT through their virtual agents or some other tools. Right. And by doing that, they can control what people are asking. So you can enforce policies. Think of it almost like a ChatGPT firewall, right? You can enforce, can't provide PII, PHI data. You can't upload legal contracts or source code or anything like that. That doesn't answer your specific question about itSMF, but just in terms of how people are leveraging the technology and what they're doing, that's what we're seeing.
Oh, that is a very perfect answer. And when I read about this whole responsive AI that goes along with the generative AI, just to put the fences around, we will be looking at what all we can add into itSM, as well as ring fencing the things with the newer technologies.
Well, the problem you're bringing up about generative AI as well is that it can be impressive, and it's dangerously impressive. It's almost impossible to determine whether it's BARD, whether it's GPT, it doesn't really matter. It's almost impossible to know if the answer that's coming back is accurate or not without doing a fair amount of fact checking, which most people don't bother. I'm sure you probably heard this story, but there's a lawyer who's representing a client who's suing in an airline because they got injured in the airline. And as they're putting together their case precedents and their legal briefs, they decided to, since they couldn't find anything, they went to GPT, and GPT came up with all these precedent cases that they included in and filed with the court. Turns out that none of those cases were even true. So now that lawyer is in a fair amount of hot water, lied to the court. It looks so real. They didn't question it, And so this concept of hallucinations is a problem. And the fact that it's so hard to distinguish an hallucination from not is what gets a lot of these people in a fair amount of trouble.
Yeah. Thank you, Pat.
Yeah.
Do we have others who have questions that might want to address the panel? We have 15 minutes left or less. So do we have any additional questions? Okay, if not, Dave, do you have any salient points, any final points, closures, things you would like to make sure we highlight before we close this call?
Yeah, I do want to mention a couple of things. One is, if you'd like to take the CCC course, it's free to you for your attendance. So you can email me. It's david.pultorak@pultorak.com. I'm happy to connect you up with the course. Curious about your feedback. I think having a shared framework. I remember pre-ITIL days. I got involved with ITIL V1, and pre-ITIL days were kind of that way with in this CritSit space, in that everybody's kind of doing their own thing, but everybody's suffering because everybody's doing their own thing. And there's small things we can all contribute to each other. I remember going over the UK early on, and people are asking me, "Hey, do you have an SLA template? And here's a real good agenda for a problem management, meeting, post-mortem or whatever." And it was great. And that's how we each helped each other. And I think the situation we're in now is that as an industry, we're kind of on our back foot, because the bad actors, they're out there, and we're going to have critical situations, and we just aren't sharing best practices in the space yet. So this is today's a good example of what we can do, but getting stuff out there. And so my personal challenge to you is take the course, because it's no framework's perfect, but this frame is the first one that's available that isn't just for the exec comms people, isn't just for the IT people. So now we've got a frame. The next thing is the community and the contribution. That's critical too, because I have some things that I think work pretty good. I have a list of, for example, we have a list of 24 drills and exercises you can do. We don't detail how to do them. We give some examples of them, but you may have a best practice for how to deliver those. So that's what we need in the community, is like, here's a frame of the stuff to pay attention to. Now let's get a community going where we exchange, because that's the way we can pull the industry up by our bootstraps. So we can, instead of every single day we see fumbling, disjointed responses, if we can get people on the same page with regard to the problem space, a shared view as to what it is, and then some alignment around the very most basic things, language, what's important to manage, people can then act together and collaborate and also act independently in alignment. And that's what we really want. We want that complexity idea of geese flying. It's not that there's a leader and that's leading the role. It's that every goose is following a simple set of rules. So having a shared understanding of the space, understanding the basics of it, so we can have independent action, joint action, alignment within organizations and then across organizations. Because if you've got it all together and you've got your view of things, but then your supplier is the one who fumbles it, right? Or your partner, it's got to be all the way through. So a framework to start, sharing your best practices is the way to light the fire. So again, take the course if you'd like to. I encourage you to. I'd love to hear your feedback on it. Get certified, be one of the first set of people to get certification on it. APMG is doing the certification. The book's published through the TSO. And start the conversation. You could think of one thing you can contribute and make sure you get it out there. Write a LinkedIn article on it. Say, here's, I had, I forget the gentleman's name, but he mentioned his risk framework. Well, how did you develop? How would you coach someone to do that? Put it in an article, get it out there. Do the tagging with the CCC so that we can get some community going around this, because we need to help each other. We need to help each other. Without helping each other, we'll always be on our back foot relative to bad actors in critical situations.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dave. Hey, I see one question that came up. I'm not sure if this is relevant to CritSit executive discussion, but Dr. Hamilton would love for the panel to chime in on smart contracts and blockchain technology. Dr. Hamilton, do you have clarity around that question? Because I'm not sure if it applies to the core topic.
Well, we're talking a bit about shared data, and the blockchain tech is really a peer-to-peer network trying to get rid of the third party. And it's been my experience that there are a lot of weaknesses, especially in the electronic health record space of that. But, if it's too far off subject, I would understand. But with all these experts in the room, I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, Dr. Brandon, I think it's a topic by itself. I think, blockchain is, and it's more on the tech side than the CritSit, right? So I would actually, differentiate. It's one of the days, it's a larger topic, right? But it is a lot more stable than what we think, right? So it's purely a tech issue than the CritSit situation might be, because we do deal with a lot of that on the healthcare. That's my opinion, and then of course, others can chime in, please.
Yeah, it's a topic in and of itself.
Yeah. So, Dave, any closing comments other than us going back into some of the future items that we have, future events, which may be relevant to this topic discussion?
No, thank you for your time. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your ideas. Community is how things get done and how we improve, and we all learn and grow together. So I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you all.
Okay, so I'm actually sharing the screen that shows our upcoming events. Dr. Hamilton, this might be also of interest to you because it may be able to go down this road, but our next event that we're going to have is July 13th, which is, as you can see, an AI GPT discussion, which will have a forum as well. And then in future discussions, we'll also be able to potentially discuss the blockchain question as well as smart contracts with Jim Dubois because of some of his background, and we'll possibly be able to have other experts as well. But these are future opportunities that we have. Once again, I would encourage that you all join as many of these as possible for the enlightenment and the sharing. This has been a great delivery. Thank you to all of the panelists that we've had, as well as all the participants and all of the contributors. And we welcome you all to come back in the future and to share in your experiences. With that, any closing comments from anyone before we go and close this call?
No, have a great day.
Have a good
Okay,
one.
seeing none, as one said, have a nice and wonderful day, and thank you all for attending.
Okay. Bye-bye, guys.
Goodbye.
Thank you all.